Hello everyone, in this video we are building a multi-step form using React, and this form would be very easily customizable, meaning that adding more and different kinds of fields won't require writing extra code or building more UI, but we would just have to update the configuration file to do that, and I'll show you guys how. But first, let's take a look how this works. So this is just the first page that we have here. We're gonna put in some username and password, and then on the next page we have more fields, and as you can see the progress bar got updated very smoothly. So I guess once we fill out also these fields, I'm not gonna fill everything out. We have the last page where we can look at it, review our answers, and submit. Before we submit, we can also navigate in between the pages and see our previous selections. So if that looks good, let's get started with coding. Okay, so I'm just gonna be copying these 3 commands from the Getting Started React website, and I'll be pasting them in the project folder where I want to initialize my app, and I'll be back when it's ready. The app is running now, and next what I'm gonna do is I'll be using a Bootstrap as a styling library, and I'll be installing the 2 packages for that, so React Bootstrap and the Bootstrap. And while that's loading, to start using it, we need to import it in our main file. In this case, it would be index.js, so import this configuration. I just also copied from their getting started page, which I'll also link. So yeah, let's save this and adding the next package, which is this React step progress bar. As you can see, they have an example here, and they provide a great progress bar and user experience with it. As you can see how smooth this is. So I'll just copy this command and install it as well. Also copy, they have an example here that I'll be using, but I'll updating it based on the code that we need. Okay, so we do have what we need so far, so let's start creating our progress bar component. So the way I usually do this is I create a new folder, name it components, and in here I'm gonna create a new file, also name multi-step progress bar. And also let's create another file which would be the styling of our progress bar. So same name, just with the CSS extension. Also let's import the multi-step progress bar in our app.js. So let's have and this goes back to components. Okay. We can save this, go back to the bar.js. Here we can create export constant multi-step progress bar. And at the top we can import the style. So just and the file name. .css. So also, since we're using the package, let's import the paste the code from there and go over what we have. So we would only be needing this from what we wrote so far, because this already creates a class, but let's rename this because we can have just the functional component that I just created, and instead of this I think we would only need 1. Okay, yeah, and remove this extra code as well. Same import. Okay, so what we have here is progress bar, and this contains all the steps. We will also be using 3 steps, but what is different in here is we would update the percent based on which step we are on. The first one would be 0%, second one would be 50, and etc. And inside steps here they have images, and we'll just create like a div class and add a label static to make it look like this round like circles for the steps and have a number of the step inside. So yeah, let's do that right now. First, remove everywhere where we have an image and instead create the div as I mentioned. We will give this div class name. So I would name it like completed and completed. So all the class name would be name of step, and if it's accomplished, and here we actually get this accomplished value from the package we're using. So this will tell us if it's accomplished, then let's give it name completed. And if it's not, then let's just have maybe like empty string. And in here we're gonna have, this would be not one, and let's copy this. Same logic applies for every single one of them, just the numbers are different. So oops, so let's move this here, and this will be number 3. Okay, so let's go to the multi-step bar CSS and set some styling for our steps. So just in general, we want step to be this circle. Let's by default give it color white, and then width we would set it to 20 pixels. The height needs to be same because it's like a perfect circle. Then font size of the number inside, that would be 20 pixels. Background color, I'll give it indigo. What's next? So border radius, this is what actually is going to turn it into a circle. Display, make it flex, justify content center, and align items also in the center. And the next, we have styling for the step completed. And in here we're just going to change background color to indigo to mark it as completed. Okay, so let's go and see what we have. Okay, so the import statement, I think the path of the multi-step progress bar was wrong. Yeah. Okay, and we did import it into app.js, but we never added in the render. So let's go ahead and remove all this extra code that we have inside the app. So I'm gonna remove everything starting here and just put multi-step progress bar. For now it does not have any props. So okay, so as you can see, it's here at the top, it's at 75%. Let's add some styling to center it. So first this is where I'll be using, let me move this so it has more space, React Bootstrap. So just container to wrap this rows and columns from React Bootstrap. So let's create our container, and the class name of this would be age 100. We want the height to be like full height. Same thing for the row. And then also for the column, this can adjust to the height of the content, but one thing we'll do here is we'll say align self-center, because we want most of the elements we'll put here. The form would be centered. So let's move our progress bar inside this container and self-center. And also one thing we might have to do is tweak a little bit of the global styles. So in here, app.logo logo height was set, but app does not have any height. So let's set it to the full, like the viewport. Okay, so it is centered now, and as you can see, we don't have the images anymore. We do have these steps, and we wanted to so the background color, let's change this. So for the completed ones, let's keep it background color indigo and color white, but for the default, let's have it this color as black and background color as white. Okay, and then we'll update the progress bar color as well. So progress bar needs to know which page we're on so that it displays the bar properly. So let's create state for that. That state would be stored in app.js, and I'm just gonna import useStateHook from React. Create the state here, so constant index set index, and by default the state would be 1, and we need to pass this to our bar. Step equals index. Now let's go to the bar and update the logic as to how we handle it. So taking in props, and then we'll be adding more props, so that's why I'm not gonna do the destructuring here. So props, and let's calculate the percent, right? So we have 3 steps. On the first step, percent would be 0, second step it would be halfway through, so 50, and then third step it would be 100%. So to do the ratio, it would be like the props step, which would be the index minus 1. That would be equivalent of like then being multiplied by 100 and then divided by 2. And also we need to pass the index. So this takes the percent from here, and we can pass to every like single one of the steps, because then it would display accomplished accordingly. So just because we're on first step, this should be here, but let's say if we go to app.js, test it out, set it at 2, we would be halfway through, and etc. So now let's add the previous and next buttons and the functionality that they would be updating the indexes or like our pages accordingly. So for this, I'll be using also like Bootstrap card and the button. And let's add another row in here where we would place our card. And the next and previous buttons are gonna go inside the footer, so just creating that now. And our 2 buttons. So first one, pasting for the second one, and these buttons we just want them to be each on like one side, so we make this card footer display flags and justify content between. Once we have that, like let's give them their titles. So this is previous, and this would be the next one. So for previous and the next, this would be disabled if we are on like the first page. So if index equals to 1. Now let's create the functions and pass it on as an on-click to these buttons. So up in here, first I'll create constant previous button. This is not taking any props. And then this will also double check if index is more than 1, otherwise we can't go less than that. So set index would be, we want to take in the previous state, so previous index, and set it as like 1 less than the previous of what we had. And for the next one, the logic would be almost the same, except we would check for the upper limit. So if index is less than 3, we would update this name as next button. And so let's do if it's more than equal to 3, and sorry, if it's less than 3. Yeah. And let's pass it on to our UI. So this equals to previous button. Okay, so this equals to next one, and that should be it. Let's see what we have here. Oh, it's all the way down there. Justify con. Oh, it's flex. Okay, so next. Okay, as you can see, the index is getting updated. Now let's start working on the form. As I mentioned, form would be placed inside the card body here. So and I'll create a form as a separate component. As I mentioned, the form would be very easily customizable. So for that, I'll create a configuration file where we would list all the questions and save it as like a array of objects, and then based on that, in that array we'll either add or remove questions. So creating that object that would be exported, I'll name it questions. So let's just create like one first array in here, first element in this array. And also, as you know, we have pages and each page has its own questions, so we have to somehow differentiate which page we're on. So I'm just gonna have it have a field section, and then each section will have its items, which would be the list of the questions. And then items would have a label that would be the name of the question. And let's create the field username and also type, as in what type of field it is. This would be text one. And let's make another one that we had on the first page, which is password, and we would create the type as password. So, and then we would write the logic to how to handle these different types. So now going back to components, this is where we create our form. So let's name it multi-step form.js. First, we want to import, I'm gonna move this form from Bootstrap. And let's create our component. So this is also a functional component. So this would take in the questions object as props. So passing in props here, and let's have it return. So we'll take the props, and for now let's not worry about handling the sections. Let's just display all the questions we have. So to do that, let's create a div. Let's give it a class name, text left. We want the form items to be displayed at the left. And let's take in props dot list, and the name of the props would be list, as how we would be passing the questions. Let's take the first item because we're not going through all the sections yet, and check if it has items. If it has the items, let's map them out, as in passing item and the index, and then we can return, let's say, just for now, return the item label, and then I'm gonna go over how to create the logic for displaying different kinds of fields. And let's go back to app.js, where we would want to take that questions, import it from the questions file, and then pass it on to our form. So, oops, not here. So this is created in the same folder, questions, and we also need to import the form that we just created. So import inside the body, as we mentioned, and let's pass in the list, and the list would be this questions, closing tag, and let's see what we have here. They're labels actually. So okay, so we do have the label, username, and password. Now let's take care of actually displaying the fields. For that, I'm gonna create a new file, name it form item. So this will be taking in item, as in like the question, and then based on what type it is, we would be displaying different fields. So let's see, item type, and the cases so far we have is the text and the password. So in case of the text, to display like just the input type of text. So also let's import form in here from Bootstrap and return, so fragment, and the label would be just coming from the field label. Pretty straightforward. So item dot label, and then we have form control is what Bootstrap uses, and type would be text in this case, and ID would be item dot label. So then we have another case, which is password. Type would get updated to password. ID, let's have input. Oops. And we also need to pass default, otherwise it would throw an error. But if the case is unknown, let's just display this, also the break statements. And we need to use this form item in the multi-step form. So going back to the multi-step form, importing our form item. And instead of this returning it here, form item, item equals to item, and we also need to pass index as, the key as maybe item dot label so that it's unique. Okay, and then let's see how that's looking. So we have two fields, username and password. So I'm gonna actually update this so it does not take that much space. So maybe instead of this, have margin 5. Okay, and then our fields are not on the left. So maybe this, I'm just gonna add it to the main styling file. So this class name text align left. Okay, so now let's add more sections and also logic for other kinds of fields like select. Going in here, adding the next object in the list, which is section 2, and items here. Once again, an array. We have label, street address, and then so the type for this one is also text, and let's duplicate this also for the city, just change the label. And then the third one, we are actually going to have state, and the type of this one would be select, but once we'll create a select, we also need to pass what options we want to display, which will be array. So for now, let's just put state 1, state 2, but could be just, anything. And let's go back to where we have the logic for the form items and add another condition here. So kind of in the same format as this one, but just this would be select. We would be returning, instead of this, let's create a class name, add some margin to it, and so we have form select from Bootstrap. Area label would be the label of the item, so passing in those to this, and so then again option, the first option would be just the item label, and then for the rest of the options we'll be mapping those out here. So item options dot map, we have option and then index, so returning another option where the value is just the name of the option, and then the name is also that one. And to display this, since we haven't updated the logic to handle different sections here, and we want to display section number 2, I'm just gonna update this one here. I'm not sure. Okay, so we are on the page 2 right now, and then we can see our options here. Now let's actually set the section logic so we don't manually update which questions are displayed, but the form automatically picks it up. For that, form needs to know which page we are on. So from f.js that has the state for it, let's pass that to form as props. So let's say step equals to index. And in the form, instead of manually just updating this, we would say props that step minus 1th element, set it as that, because in arrays the countdown starts from 0, but we started our pages from 1, so that's why we need to do that minus 1. So let's, if we do previous here, the questions displayed gets updated. So for the last page, I'm gonna add another section, and in this section I want like users to just have like an alert or notice to please like make sure that you have reviewed your answer. So the type of the notice, I'll just like name it information. So items in here, we would only have one item, and so label would be if you are ready to submit, please press submit, and we'll also work on the displaying the submit button afterwards. And so the type would be information. So let's do this logic in here. Did I do something? Oh, I think this is a period instead of comma. Okay, yeah. So let's work on displaying the logic. This should be a pretty simple update. So at the end we just say case information, and we just return maybe like paragraph that just displays the label. Okay, so let's see, and this should be on the last page. So if we go on the next one, yeah, we can see the information here. Submit button. If we are on the last page, let's display that. So we're gonna add another, not disabled, but the logic here based on if this is a next or a submit. The way this logic would be determined would be based on the question's length. So if we are on the last page, then we would be on that page with that number. So let's get the number of pages first. So total pages count. This would be, here we have already imported questions at the top, so this would be just the length. And if here, let's add the logic. So if index equals to total pages count, then we can display submit. Otherwise we'll keep the next. Okay, so let's quickly check that. Yeah, there's a submit here. So we do have questions in place, but we also do want to record the answers, right? So let's, for that one, let's create a new state, put in the multi-step form, and then create the functions to update the state accordingly to like which field we're on. So use a state hook from React and constant answers set answers equals to use state, and initially we just have an empty array. And let's create a function to update answers based on which field we're on in here, and then we would have to pass this to the form item itself because it would be the field itself that would be updating the form answers. So I'm just gonna name this function update answers, and this would take in the new value of the answer as well as the category of it. And So the way it would set answers is that it would keep all the other answers because we don't want to clear them, and only update that specific category. If it does not exist, then it would just like add. And we do want to pass this on to form item, so on change equals to update answers, and then let's define this on change. Use this on change props in the form item. So just because we have different logics, we would have to handle this almost the same way, but in all the cases we would have to handle this. So what we would have here is we would have event, and then you take the onChange, let's pass it on here, onChange. So the new value coming from the event, so if it's a text, it would be what user has typed in. And so in here we do need to have the category of the item, which is what we would have to define in the question. So whatever would add another field, name it value, and then the answers would be stored using this value in the state. So for username, we're gonna have the same username. This is usually would be the cases when your label is different, for example, capitalized or etc. So yeah. This would be password. What else we have here? So street address, we don't want any like spaces when we are actually creating the state for the answer. So the value would be street. Here, let's have city. And then just the state. In terms of information, we're not updating anything, so we don't really need the value or the onChange. So in here, we'll pass item.value. So this would be the same. This is for the text input. This would be the same for the password, and for onSelect, I think instead of, we do also have onChange, the function. Okay, so let's check this using the DevTools. I have components up and observing multi-step form. If we update the street address or the city, you can see that it's changing here. So now we want to store, once we navigate to the next page and come back to the previous page, we want to have that answer stored. So let's handle that. Capture this values of previous and the next page answers in app.js. And then we can store these values when user presses either next or previous and then update, versus in the form, multi-step form, the way it happened, it's like if it's a text input, it will get updated on every like keystroke, or if it's a select, then it would get updated as soon as user selects. So that would be like two different things. So yeah, let's create a new state in here. I'm gonna name it pages answered because we would also need to know which page these answers are on. So set pages answers, and this would be, by default, this is just an empty object. So create like a function to update these answers that we would have to pass it to the index and previous buttons. So let's create this on pages answer update. So we need to take in which step we're on, and then the new answers object in here. and then this would we would be using the set state hook and leaving all the other pages answers there, just updating the answers for that particular page. Okay. So we're missing one dot here. Yeah. And then we can pass this to the multi-step form. So on page update, on pages answer update. And going to the multi-step form, so the way we can do this is we can trigger this updates every time page changes. So to trigger, to have a dependency and trigger updates, we would need to use effect hook. So importing that here, and also update the use state. So by default we have the index, which is props.step, and in the use effect our dependency would also be props.step, since that's the indicator of which page we're on. So if the answers is not empty, so we would check for that first. So way to check is object.keys, get the answer state, and then the length. So since by default the one of the fields is indexed already, then the length, there's other answers would be more than one. So if we do have answers, then we want to update the page answers. This is where we use the function that we just passed from props. This is on page update, and we would be using the current state that of the page we are on. That's why we stored this index in here, because if it gets updated from the parent, then that's the next state. So we need to know what was before and our answers state. Then the next thing we would do is locally we would also update the page index, so props.step. Else, if we're not updating answers, we're just updating the page numbers. So we would just copy this and paste it in here. And for the form item, let's see, we don't need any changes because this is only about storing answers in the page. Now, even though we are storing the answers, we're not actually using them to display on the form. So what we want is, if user goes back, the fields that they filled out is all displayed on. To happen, we need to pass the previous answers from app.js to the form. So that would be, let's also name this props, pages answers, and then from the form to the item itself, because it would be the form items that would be displaying those. So in the form, let's have in here the answer and display. So we don't want to pass the whole object for all the pages, so we would have to determine if the answer actually exists for that specific item. So that would be props.pages answer, and then let's check if that page has filled out first. If it has, then we would pass in the answers on that specific page and passing the item value itself. And then if it doesn't exist, then we pass null, and going to the form item itself, we also check the logic, as in, if is the answer null or not. If it is, then we just use the default answer. So let's also have state where we store the current one. So import use state from React and constant current value set current value equals to use state. Answer, if answer is undefined, then we just say null. And over here, this to be reflected, we would have to update all this to just display the current values. So form control, what else we have? The password, and we'll do the same for the select. Have a typo in here because I named it pages answers. So yeah, I can see, so ABC, moving on to the next page, going back to previous A. Okay, so we have that. That I did that I'll quickly show is once the user submits the form, they get this your answer have been submitted, they can start over from the first page. So for that I have a state here for submitted, by default it's false. Then I have a handle start which sets the page to 1 and sets submitted to false. Also on the next button, if we are on the last page, then this would clear the previous answer, set submitted to true. And based on the submitted, this card would be displayed, the one that I just showed you. So this would be all for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I have more tutorials coming, including React, Redux, and TypeScript. So please make sure to subscribe and see you next time.